Stay hungry, stay foolish.
So now on the Innovation Show, it's a great honor to welcome author of 4 fantastic books, including the great creative architect, Pierluigi Serraino. Did I say it right, man?
Yeah, you did great. You did great. I'm very happy to be with you guys.
It's great to talk to you, man. And we were rolling beforehand, and I had to get us recording because I was like, we're going to lose some magic. This is going to be like when James Brown was rolling on and didn't record some of those great takes beforehand.
Yes, I'm very delighted to be here, and I was telling Aidan I'm very fond of Irish people and Irish culture. Maybe it's my Italian heritage that makes me feel like this, but yeah. I have very close friends like that.
So we're going to talk about, you know, your ethos, but also some of the great work you've captured and brought to the world that was hidden in a way that was buried, and you brought this great gift back to the world of what is creativity. But before we go there, because you have a great backstory, Pierluigi, and you talked about that Italian heritage, but that's not really where. Yes, you were raised in Italy till you were 16, but you got off Italy and you landed in the States, and it's given you these great lenses to see the world totally different. It'd be great to hear your story.
Well, I was born and raised in Sicily, and I come from a family of builders. My father was a structural engineer, and my brother is also a structural engineer. I was raised on construction sites, and my mother was always very interested in the arts. So I'm the product of, in a classic sense, of both my parents. And my father was always a very entrepreneurial, and raised me to think independently and to follow my own instincts. And so I wanted to be a musician, and my father was very skeptical about the possibility of making a living out of this. So he made me aware that there was this thing called architecture, and he gave me a book called Architecture of Space by Bruno Zevi. And from there, I developed a very strong interest in architecture as an art form. At 16, I came to the United States. I was actually here for a month, and I came here by myself. Well, I was with my brother, who was 18 at the time, but he was very independent himself, and then we actually split when we were here. We landed in San Francisco. So I was on my own at 16 in the Bay Area, which was extraordinary in the early 80s. And I always felt that California was a place of free thinking. It's a frontier, and it's an economic frontier, it's a technological frontier, but it's a sociological frontier, and intellectually as well. So I then came back to Europe, came to the US multiple times, went to Rome to study architecture, and graduated, a license there, and then catapulted myself to Los Angeles to do a master. Actually, did 2 masters, one at SciArc and one at UCLA. And there I did a lot of work, theoretical work on architectural photography. I met Julius Schulman, the great architectural photographer. I did a book called Modernism Rediscovered that came out with Taschen in 2000. I'm saying this because it felt that California was completely open to anything. I mean, it was a total newcomer, and all I had to do was making phone calls and knock people, and it was far away from everything. I didn't know anybody. I just had to follow my instincts, and people were responsive to that. And so with this, I met a number of characters. I met the folks of Morphosis, many different architects, Frank Isra, Mark Mack. I even met Frank Gehry in the early days. It was quite a wonderful a playground. And then I moved to UC Berkeley, where I worked on my doctoral program in architecture. And I kept writing and I kept practicing. I've always done this at the same time, because I think of architecture as a humanistic enterprise. It's not really about square footage. It's about transforming the program into something impactful on the human condition. And in this respect, to me, the architect that I respond the most to is Louis Kahn, who sublimated the world of square footage into a spiritual experience. And his writing bear witness to this vision. So as I was working on this architecture photography and then California modernism, because Schulman photographed much of what was going on in the post-war period on the West Coast, I became aware of this extensive legacy, which is really the post-war period in the US and especially in California, which is where California became the center of worldwide attention. After World War II, this amazing technology that had been developed, you have to think 50% of the federal budget came to California during World War II. The development of the aircraft industry and the shipbuilding industry in San Francisco and Los Angeles created an extraordinary technological society. The war is over. People are out there. They need a job. What are we going to do? Many of them go into the building industry. And this changes dramatically the way people do architecture and practice engineering and things like that. One of the characters that was most influential in my thinking in Berkeley here was Don Olson, who was one of the architects that selected the architects that would be part of the creativity study. And he was the one who made me aware that there were these files, that there was this material somewhere. And another person that told me about this was Raymond Neutra, the third son of Richard Neutra, whom I met casually at the Oakland airport. He said, I found the files on my father. This was 2009. I think you should look at them, because Richard Neutra was one of the 40 architects that was studied. Now, the study is very important because it's one of a kind enterprise. One of those efforts that is unrepeatable in of itself. Essentially, you identify the most creative people in one field. Obviously, they're all alive. You invite them to come to Berkeley in groups of 10 for 3 days, and they actually decide to come. The folks that came to be part of the study in 58, 59 were really quite extraordinary characters. There was Eero Saarinen, there was Louis Kahn, there was Richard Neutra, there was I.M. Pei, Pietro Belluschi, Elliot Noyes, Philip Johnson, George Nelson, John Johansson. I mean, we can go on and on and on. It was really remarkable. It's remarkable because Saarinen had already done General Motors by 1955, and Philip Johnson had done the Seagram with under Mies in 1958. So these were people that were paid top dollars, and to come to Berkeley for 3 days to submit themselves to an experiment that was kind of far-fetched. It was done under the pressure of, in this case, William Worcester, who was a big supporter of Eero Saarinen. He was the dean at UC Berkeley, the College of Environmental Design. And Saarinen was the most important architect of his generation. So when people realized that Saarinen was coming, everybody jumped on it, and they wanted to be part of the study. So it kind of snowballed. And so you have this cast of characters in here that goes through this very unlikely experiment, a study that was structured around the assessment method, which was a method used to select individuals that would operate effectively under tremendous pressure during war missions, counter-espionage, and things of this nature. And so they translated this method from war aims to civic aims. Essentially, instead of looking at the effective people, they were looking at creative people, but the concept was the same. So 3 days in a lab, going through group discussions, live interviews, multiple graphic forms, checklists. There were a total of 22 hours of procedures that were administered in those 3 days. And there were the formal times where people were being studied, and then there were the informal times. It's one thing when you're sitting down and you are checking these forms, doing whatever you have to do, and then when they just interact with each other, their word choice, their physical arrangement, everything became a subject of study. And so this extreme form of surveillance was something that had never been fully done to this scale, because you have to think that the architect study is only one of the many studies that they did. They studied writers, they studied Air Force pilots, they studied the expedition, the members of the expedition on Mount Everest. They studied, as I was telling you, Irish managers. They studied engineers of Silicon Valley. They studied women mathematicians and a bunch of other groups. So it's this was a gargantuan effort by all standards, and something that was never repeated again. And the fact that after all this effort and all this money spent and this tremendous human resources in play, that they did not do a book on it, it seemed to be absolutely absurd. I mean, it's like you are imploding in so much data that you don't even know how to get around it.
Yeah.
And that is what happened, really. So in a way, I wrote the book for them, but adding all the backstage details on how the selection process took place, who were the people that they were dealing with, what was the rationale behind many of their criteria, and that's just as important as the results. So there's a lot to reflect upon. Although the book this point came out June of last year, I keep discovering things. I mean, the archive is inexhaustible. So there are many papers that have been unpublished by some of the IPAR founders with additional data, new insights. They all reinforce the idea that the creative is really an independent thinker, and it's someone that sees the world in a very different way. He sees the reality, but the way he or she sees the reality is not patterned the way it is seen by the majority of the population. I mean, if you think in terms of the bell curve, the creative works at the edges of that curve. And so I figure out that the really knowledge is the reorganization of bits of creativity is the organization of bits of knowledge that are linked in unconventional ways. And that's an important part, to see that a particular situation, a particular object, a particular relationship can be sequenced in ways that are not typical, will yield a result that is unforeseen. The creative, by default, does not suppress the possibility of an alternative, but let it all play out. And that's huge.
Yeah. It's actually something I wanted to talk to you about. When I read about your work, I felt there's such a lesson here from an innovation perspective, in that so many architects are actually innovators. They see the world differently, and so many entrepreneurs actually see the world differently, whether it be through some type of diversity. We mentioned before that some of the best architects were dyslexic and could write backwards, etc., and just actually saw things differently and saw patterns where others did not see. Something you say often is that it often looks like a step backwards what the architect is doing, but eventually people see that it's the way forward.
So the challenge of architecture is that it takes a significant amount of advocacy for a building to be built. So you have to rally a community to be behind you, and that's the reason why the most influential architects are amazing, persuasive people, because they have to sell you a promise of happiness, of things that have yet to happen. And if you're doing this not as a commercial enterprise, but as a narrative of possibility, possibilities that are just simply not the usual competent deliverable, then you have to make a case for why that will work. And then it's a leap of faith. In fact, one of the key ingredients of the creative is the courage. And at the end of the book, there is like the pinnacle of the discovery that McKinnon and his team found. Is that you just have the courage, because you can be intelligent, you can have talent, you can have insight, but are you going to act on that insight? You can have the energy, you can have the motivation, but will you do it? Will you actually take the leap? And you might crash, but crashing doesn't diminish the effort of trying. Because in the absence of trying, you will never, ever move the world forward. It's impossible. Yeah. I mean, just think about the Wright brothers.
Yeah.
Right?
It's exactly in line with innovation. And I never thought about it until I read your work, because it dawned on me that all this stuff, all this creativity, and all the traits that the study discovered and you uncovered are the same as the innovator, in that they have the courage, they have self-confidence, they believe in it, they see the world differently. They also have to sell that idea to other people who are non-believers and get them on side. And they're all similar traits. And I just thought that was just such a great thing to see, that people who innovate and create different environments are also people who are innovators, and that architects are actually the best architects in the world are innovators.
The architecture is dealing with the mechanisms of real estate, and real estate means finances, and means banking, and means loans, and banks are notoriously risk adverse. So how can you promote innovation and fuel this leap forward into the unknown when you don't know where you're going to land? You have a hunch that it's going to go in that direction. You believe, you have this fierce belief, but your belief, it's informed intuition. It's not irrational. You're not being capricious or out of your mind. You have a hunch that something is not quite right, and that there is a solution out there. So the creative consistently ruffles the feather of the norm. The people that live their life according to the norm will behave accordingly, but won't have the actual chance of moving the field forward. Now, not everybody has to be an innovator, obviously, and it's perfectly fine to be competent and to do excellent work along those lines. But if you're seeking the next big thing, it's just not going to come from that. Because the creativity it's rooted in skepticism and in doubt. Is this really the only way in which we can do one thing? And that's why, yes, we have shoes, but then there's always someone that comes up with a different shoe that tells us a different story about walking. And it's just not about protecting our souls. It's about the experience of inhabiting your foot. I mean, that your foot inhabits a piece of equipment in a way that has never been seen before. Everything in creativity of every kind, it's about charting a new territory, and the new territory is inherently fraught with risk. So how do you forge an agenda of risk-taking in an environment that is so commercially fettered, by specific ties and obligations? It's a real challenge, and therefore the architect that is able to pull it off, and the creative in general, has to sustain that vision for a very long time, because the system will consistently bash you until it has obliterated you, unless you have enough resilience to counter it and obviously have some demonstration that your thinking is actually grounded into something, because the creativity has to attend a real problem, not an imaginary problem. There have to be specific traits that McKinnon had identified very clearly. That's the beauty of the IPAR study. And the conclusion is that they did not hesitate in making conclusive statements about particular conditions. I mean, what are the conditions of creativity? Is the creative person? Is the creative environment? Is the creative product? Is the creative process? In the absence of these four elements entering in synergy with each other, you cannot have creativity. I'm sure there are creative people in parts of the world that are inherently not structured for that creativity to emerge in its full potential. Because creativity is, the creative person is in every culture, in every age, in every class system. It's not tied to the particularities of nature of a social system. It just is out there. It's just a different way of thinking, and that everybody can do that. Anybody, as long as you're willing to listen to yourself. And that's why this resonates very much with Maslow and with the Winnicott, the psychologists, that we all were creative until schooling kicked in. It gives you the instruments of literacy, but at the same time starts editing your thought process so that you start thinking more and more alike, so that you can become a functioning part of society. But the creative holds on to aspects of that childhood. So your curiosity is inexhaustible.
Yeah.
You're never done with your work, ever. It energizes you. It's very life affirming.
That's where that independence and that ego, that self-confidence and that courage that you mentioned is so important, because you're going against the grain. And it'd be great, Pierluigi, if we could talk about some of the traits, because I find this uncovered a whole new way of thinking for me. From this study, I saw this is what employers are looking for today, because companies are becoming very similar and companies are being disrupted over and over again. Yet companies hire the same people from the same schools and the same consultants to come in and do the same strategies for the companies. And it's just the Einstein insanity loop over and over. And what they need is different thinkers. Reading your book will show them some of the traits and some of the characteristics that they need for people, new hires into their company, to give fresh thinking.
There is a challenge that is a default into the company and the creative. Companies are business entities. They come together under the pressure of commerce and money making, and the creative has the economic value as the lowest value compared to the aesthetic value. When I talk about aesthetic, it's not about simply the sheer aesthetic as a superficial layer to be added. The creative person doesn't want to solve the problem alone. He or she wants to solve the problem beautifully as an art form. It has to be right. It's just like writing the perfect algorithm. And maybe many algorithms can do the same, can serve the same function. That's why this false belief that the post-war period is a problem-solving period is actually debunked, this myth, because the creative doesn't really care about solving the problem. Yes, the gathering data, doing the classic data retrieval, figuring out what's happening, what's at stake, who are the stakeholders, and blah, blah, blah. That's an aspect of it, but that is not where the creative effort comes. It's sublimating the specificity of the situation into a bigger statement, which is a statement about the beauty of the question that you're dealing with, and the resolution of it as at the level of the art form. And that has nothing to do with the architect. Even the mathematicians were interested at that level. The aspect that was really fascinating about the study is that the same traits were found in people who had a lot of relationship with the media, like the architects, because the press is a very important aspect of architecture. There's a lot in name recognition, which mobilizes money, not differently from fashion. But the mathematicians don't have a presence in the media. People just don't know who they are, right? Name me a mathematician today that is the most famous one. Nobody knows. And yet they had the same trait. They did not want to work in groups. They wanted to explore their inner world. The work is designed to address a specific problem, a real problem, not an imaginary one. There's nothing capricious about it. It's solved in a way that has never been solved before. So therefore, there is a skepticism around that kind of response. And then as you keep doing more and more work in that vein, then the community realizes that maybe there is a different way of doing things. So there's an element, there's a time factor in the creativity. It's not that you have a sudden burst of something and then voila, you have the solution. They have also identified the 5 phases of creativity, which were in a way, they confirmed through their empirical study what had already been hypothesized. You have a data retrieval period, then you do a processing of it. You're trying to figure out an answer. Routinely, you get frustrated. It's not good enough. Yes, you can be competent, but it's not where it should be. You retreat yourself from that question. Subliminally, your brain still processes the question. You have a eureka moment, and you go back and verify that through very disciplined work. These 5 phases exist pretty much in every field. And so that's something that if you can declare it, then you can structure a company culture that will enable these phases to exist, right? So that's important. If the creative doesn't work on a 9-to-5 scheme, what kind of scheme can you create where your timesheet is organized in a different way? Yeah. Maybe it's an accounting issue, right? Because you need to have a job number for your time to be. Because ultimately, people they need to have the retirement thing. They need to have the standard perks of employment. But the creative doesn't really care for that. I mean, I have to say, it's not. The creative doesn't tend to be company material in the way we know companies today. So maybe it's a question of finding a new format for a company for these synergies to take place, because ultimately, these are not people that work entirely in isolation. They come out, they generate the idea in isolation, but often and their execution takes place in teams. But if the creative is put in a team right away from the get-go, he or she will typically underperform. He will do the least amount of work because he or she will feel typically that the work is below the standard that he or she has decided to have. And it sounds very arrogant, but not everybody, if you have worked in groups, not everybody has the same interest and the same drive. The creative is radicalized, was self-radicalized into the field of their choice. Right? It's not there. There is no holiday. There is no Christmas. Yeah. I remember I met the Eero Saarinen's son, Eric Saarinen, last year, and he was telling me that at some point Kevin Roach told him about the story that his father came in one day and he said, "Where is everybody?" And Kevin Roach said, "Well, it's Christmas." What do you mean it's Christmas? Kevin is Irish, so you guys should relate to this. But yeah. It's funny. I mean, the guy is in his own time zone. Yeah. It's just, what do you mean it's Christmas?
I love that.
So, but yeah.
You know what, Pierluigi? I was just thinking there when you said this about the creative person not feeling, committed to the group or feeling that this work is substandard and they go quiet. And you often see this with really talented people, but you also see it in places like the classroom where a child might go quiet, and then they're seen as enfant terrible, or they're seen as the
Yeah.
awkward child, or they're almost conditioned to think there's something wrong with them, and it's only through
Yeah.
mentorship or strong parents to ignite that gift or to unleash it, that child can succeed. How do you feel about that? Because I know you're a father.
That's something that I as a parent, I've been myself interested in. In the study that McKinnon conducted, he realized that the parents of these creatives gave a significant amount of autonomy to their children. So their children knew. They felt that their children knew how to conduct themselves, but they also held them to very high standards. The standards were through their own conduct and their own kind of sense of authority. Someone that was a parent could set an example of ethics, of work ethic, of integrity, something that is transferred to the child, but then the child is not controlled, is not micromanaged. The child is allowed to develop on his or her own pace. And then in the life of the creative, there's always someone that awakens them to their own potential. Sometimes it's a friend, sometimes it's a brother or sister, sometimes is occasionally is a parent, but often is a teacher. Someone that made them accountable to their possibility, to the possibility, potential, to what they could really do, and then that energy is unleashed. It's as if the creative is an incubation, kind of a sort of a moving target. He or she moves around and tries to. He's interested in everything. There's curiosity on every subject, and at some point, that curiosity finds a specific outlet, and then tremendous intensity goes into that. Tremendous resolve, and it's that one individual, a friend, a mentor, someone who has some age difference, that in a way. Establishes a benchmark of performance and delivery, to which the creative wants to match and exceed. That was pretty much across the board.
I love that, and you know what? It reminds me of. It's almost like our role, and if we are privileged enough to have the bandwidth and also maybe the finances to do this, that I often feel it's our role as parents. It's almost like the child is a honeybee, and you're to give them as many flowers to test, and to find the one that they want. And then when you see and you're aware, you have your radar on to go, he or she is really into this. Now I need to nourish that and nurture it, and let them intensify.
But why can this model be applied to companies, right? I mean, if a company creates a situation where people can flourish, but really can flourish, not that they get milked to extract labor from them in a classic Marxist scheme, and then they getting peanuts, because the underperformance is the function of a lack of respect for the workforce. Yeah, okay, I'm going to give you my time, but what do I get in return? I myself, when I worked in firms, I was never credited for anything.
Yeah.
And, no matter how hard I worked, it
yeah,
didn't matter. Well, I mean, but it matters to me.
It does, yeah.
Right, and then even the financial rewards goes somewhere else. I don't know, there has to be a different way of doing things, because I frankly see widespread unhappiness in the workforce. I don't see growth in a professional growth. I don't see the betterment of the human condition. I just see people receiving paychecks but being disillusioned.
Yeah,
and then you buy stuff.
Yeah, and
it just doesn't seem very.
Yeah, and it's getting
Yeah, and
worse, isn't it?
worse and worse.
It's getting worse,
Frankly.
and it's actually, I joined the company I'm in, Catawave at the moment. I joined it for that reason because I was seeing the same thing, and I was like, there's people disillusioned. There's companies that are rudderless, that are just ghost ships on the ocean and are heading towards icebergs. And a lot of CEOs and leaders are just caretakers of a role rather than actually wanting to do that and to change. And then they have people like you, or change makers or mavericks within the company, who are capable of changing the course of the ship, yet they won't engage with them and let them have a more of a leadership role, or let them have more of influence on the company.
Oh, but the system will purge you. The system is designed to keep the status quo. I mean, I am all from entrepreneurship and individualism. I do feel that nurturing other people's talent. It does benefit the company because it's an ecosystem. People can always return to the company, or they can form their own company, right? I mean, it's an aspect of I don't know, raising new talent and knowledge transfer. I mean, we're not here. We all have an expiration date, and this kind of thinking is the thinking of the alchemist. If you have some beautiful knowledge that you can share and you can pass around, why not? And then you will develop more because you have created conditions of growth, of artistic growth, of creative growth. People that hang on to particular things as the only thing are actually hiding more structural issues. It's very one-sided. I admit that. I just don't see a real healthy environment in the absence of a possibility for an individual to grow, not just financially when you have the opportunity to grow financially, but to grow as a human being.
Yeah.
I mean, learning is a structural part of the human condition. You want to learn, you want to be aware. If you spend so much time working, it cannot be drudgery. Monday should be a day to celebrate, not like a death sentence.
I see the most creative people, they don't do work-life balance because they don't see a division between work and life. It's the same thing, and they're doing what they work at as part of their life. And that's why I think that what you said is so spot on about it needs to be a journey of discovery and curiosity and learning for it to be anyway enjoyable. But I'd love to jump to this, Pierluigi, because
Sure.
you said this at the start about when you got to San Fran and California, that you felt that it was such a place of creativity and growth. And I'm a huge believer in that. And you as an architect will totally get this, is that if the environment, be it a building or an area, is filled with like-minded people, and this goes for corporations and organizations as well. If people are on the same page mentally, they can achieve such amazing things. And then if the environment enables them and gives them even more, and you talked about a building being so much more than a building, that it gets into it's a spiritual entity essentially, that those things put together can really create magic in a business.
I am completely with you. I'm completely with you as far as both the human ecology that is part of a company, as well as the physical environment to which you're part of. There is some kind of cross-pollination between the place you're physically inhabiting and the way you experience life. I don't have any empirical studies on that, but I have noticed that in spaces that have been well designed, and they don't have to be modern spaces. They can be also the spaces of classicism, that people live better. Their mental health is much higher, and they tend to live longer. I mean, the quality of your life is significantly higher. So a sense of feeling connected and part of a bigger thing is something that definitely helps promote a desire to contribute and to give, because the creative ultimately is a romantic. If economic value is not the primary reason why people do what they do, the excitement of sharing that discovery is as if, you know what, I just realized this thing. Look at this, and then wow, everybody looks at the same thing and they get the same excitement. The creative works more along those lines, and he or she will continue to operate along those lines with all their work. California created conditions in certain parts. I would say it still does today, although the digital economy is creating its own form of feudalism, unfortunately. But when you are away from the lid of social systems that have been historically locked, you don't allow the alternative to grow organically. So California was always far away from the centers of power until it became itself its own center of power. You have to think that the internet was a military technology, and the MIT, got a tremendous amount of federal funding for that, but it's still part of the East Coast, and the East Coast is closer to Europe, and Europe has its own hierarchical structure that doesn't allow ideas that could upset the society as we know it to do what it wants to do. So in California, none of this was at play. So the internet exploded through Silicon Valley and through essentially a technology that has put the world on its knees. I mean, no one can do anything without computers. I mean, it's impossible. Impossible. And they're all in Silicon Valley because there are conditions that allow. It's an intersection of things, right? It's the role of California in the world order. It's the end of the Western world. The climate is fantastic. The place is only 165 years old, practically yesterday for European standards. Everybody's always a newcomer, but because he or she's a newcomer, is already instantly a Californian. It's very easy. It's very easy to fit in because no one. There is no norm about the Californian. It's an open-ended scheme of human achievement. And if you just want to stay next to the pool, it's just fine. It's just that laziness and pleasure is built into this. But at its core, there is this individualism filled with youthful energy. And youthful energy, youth is not chronological. It's in the spirit of the people. And Frank Lloyd Wright said something really beautiful in interviews with Mike Wallace toward the end of his life. He said, young is something that there's nothing you can do, nothing at all about. But the youthful is something that it's part of your spirit. And if you are youthful, that quality, you will never lose it. You will always have it. And California has that spirit. I mean, Frank Gehry is 88, but it's very youthful as an individual. I mean, the architecture is very joyful. It has a lot of, you might not like it, people say that's not architecture, whatever, but that's a different story. It's the very possibility of doing it. Where can this happen? And that's what California has been, and that's why creativity. Talking about the four categories: creative product, the creative process, creative person, creative environment, came in full force here at a scale that has yet to be matched. I mean, I love New York, but New York is not California. It's just not. New York is the center of economy, it's the center of publishing, but it's not the center of technology. It's another London.
Yeah,
it's a financial work, but it's extremely difficult to break through New York because it's very locked through family. It's a much older society. That's why I don't believe in China as an economic. Yeah, I mean, yes, there's a sheer number of people, but there's no free speech. The environment is not the one that we have here in California. And, I'm not saying that California is perfect. I mean, a lot of things are that can go haywire, but broadly speaking, the conditions are more favorable here for things to happen on many levels.
Yeah, but that makes a lot of sense, because it's like, even in an organization, you might walk into one section of the business and it will have a totally different culture and a different value system and a different mindset, and that you feel almost a different energy. And it's the same with, even in the same country, you get those different values and different mindsets and different energy fields. And that's what it's like in the States, I find. You go from state to state, or you go from Cali to New York, and you feel that. It's a different vibe, literally.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely. You feel it, and therefore your ability to operate and the way you think about how you could operate changes, because certain options are completely foreclosed. And the thing is, in California, no one is going to tell you you're a total nut job. You will always have someone who's going to listen to you. Whereas in other parts of the world, people start laughing. This is ridiculous. Why would you even think about that? You don't even start. So you cannot do anything until you start thinking about the possibility of making that thing happen. Nothing will change before having the vision of it. I know it sounds like I'm sounding like Captain Obvious, but it is true. Yeah, it's true. You have to think it. You have to declare it through a drawing, a diagram, or something, and then it becomes transmittable to someone else. And in California, there's always someone who's willing to listen to you. And it's not because people were born here. I mean, a fraction of the people has been born here. Everybody has come here from somewhere else. So everybody carries. I mean, I would say the general ethos is an ethos of discovery and playfulness and possibilities of making things happen. You just don't come here to lounge. Let's put it like that. I mean, yeah, you might go to Palm Springs, but you don't stay here to be inactive. Let's put it like this. Zuckerberg could have stayed in Harvard, but he would have not made Facebook. You have not created. There was no way.
Yeah,
he had to come. So,
Pierluigi, it's been phenomenal speaking to you, man. It's been a real pleasure. And the book is The Creative Architect. It's a very highly recommended read for way beyond architecture. I think that it's really important to say that to our audience, is that this book is, while it's the subject matter and you're the subject matter expert, there's so many values and nuggets of knowledge that you can get from this book. And Pierluigi Serraino, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for joining us.
Aidan, it's been wonderful, and I greatly enjoy our time together.
Now on the Innovation Show, we welcome Ben Ryan, CEO and founder of Ambionics. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Thank you very much for having me.
So some people will know the story, your trials and tribulations and your reaction to those trials and tribulations. But there's a saying that I love, and I came across it when I was about 18. I saw the movie La Haine, which is a French movie, and it starts off with this story of this guy who falls from the, 50th floor from a building. And the narrator says, "L'important n'est pas la chute, c'est l'atterrissage," which means the important thing is not the fall, but the landing. And when I read the story about you and Sol and your wife, I thought of that straight away, which is the reaction that you took to this challenge that you were given. Yeah. And your positive reaction to it has been fantastic. Could you tell our audience the story, Ben?
Yeah, I will do. Firstly, though, I think my father would be laughing here. Something he's always told me as I've been growing up is that, don't be scared of heights. It's not the height that kills you, it's the floor, which I think ties in nicely with what you've just said. But no, I definitely, yeah. I had to get to grips with the fact that my son was going to lose his hand on the first day, and You just immediately started looking at my own hands and thinking all the things I do. I've mess around with vehicle mechanics, stripping and assembling engines, gardening. I love technical projects, building computers. I used to be a boxer. I played guitar, and I just dwelled on all these things that he was never going to do. And it was actually a nurse who came in to tell us an update on Sol's blood work, because the hospital that transferred him hadn't acknowledged that or even suggested that it could have been caused by an injury. So they were looking for underlying blood clotting disorders and stuff. So we were constantly asking for the blood work, and they came in and said, we don't have the blood work, but we know his blood type. It's B positive. And I'm not a religious man, but I took that as a sign. I clung onto it, and I'm going to be positive, I thought. So I'm only going to think about what I can do to help him. And from that night in the hospital in the shower, I was thinking, right, how am I going to teach him how to dry himself with one hand? And literally went into it from there. It just became this. I knew I was going to have to teach him things to do with one hand, so I was going to have to learn how to, for example, tie my shoelaces with one hand so I could show him, and that kind of thing. And that approach has taken me to where I am today.
Yeah, and that adversity, that was the word I was looking for, because we did a show last week on AQ. So it's this thing, you might not have heard of it, Ben. It's AQ. This guy, Dr. Paul Stoltz, has built a career on it, and he studied some of the most successful CEOs in the world, and they all score very, very highly in adversity quotient. So they've all had some adversity that they overcome, which teaches them and changes how their brain works. And already, man, you're showing signs of that already with what your reaction to the adversity, and you just went, okay, I'm going to feel sorry for myself. That's natural. Those kind of dealing with it straight up front. But then, and I think, it's a fatherly thing as well. It's like, okay, well, what can I do to fix this? And you actually went for that hell for leather to fix this. Yeah.
It didn't strike me immediately. I knew I could do something that wasn't being offered straight away. I don't know if you've seen about, he's lost he retained about an inch of bone below the elbow on the left arm. So not an awful lot. And, surgeons were telling us really to go straight through the elbow, that there was going to be so little bone that could be saved below the elbow that it would be cleaner, less hassle all round for Sol if we just took away that movement. And, we got the family together, looked at all the pros and cons, and we decided that, no, we don't want to close any doors. Just because they're saying that he won't be able to operate a device with what he has doesn't mean that there won't be another device soon that can use it. Or, for example, I started reading that there were 3D printing bone and that they can elongate bones and all sorts of things. I thought, well, if we take that option away now, you've closed that door forever. So by leaving it open, I started to explore possibilities, and I've come up with several different things. A lot of interest being gathered around the hydraulic prosthetic for sort of 8 to 10 month olds. But the real groundbreaking stuff, I think, was the stuff I did for pennies, starting when he came home from hospital. And that's where I think the real innovation began, just looking at Sol and trying to equip him to deal with his environment, however basic that environment was. I mean, I started by, he was lying on a little play mat that's got 2 sort of semicircular hoops over the top with toys suspended from it. And I realized his left arm was just sitting by his side doing nothing. So I started to lower this, get some string and try and lower the toys on that side. And I realized I was modifying the wrong thing. I should be making his arm longer. So I went into the kitchen, got a kitchen sponge, rolled it up, put some micropore tape around it to make an approximate size wrist. Using a bit of cotton wool and a bandage, a sports bandage, I just lightly tacked it onto his stump. And literally within seconds, he started moving it, smiling and giggling, and then started hitting his toys. So I thought, well, every time he's playing with his toys, I'll just pop this on it. Literally just slid over the stump. And changed it out every 3 or 4 days. And I think that's been quite groundbreaking in terms of his ability to accept even a passive prosthetic from the NHS. He just put it straight on. The prosthetist said we'd be lucky to get him to wear it for 15 minutes a day. Put it straight on, wears it all day long, falls asleep with it, you take it off, and wake up in the morning and he puts it on himself. So that's what I really want to focus on, is getting any technology, the earliest stage you can, to try and assist the use of movement and interaction. And, if you do that seamlessly in Sol's case, from 5 weeks, then they don't know any different. They've only ever had a reach.
Yeah, man, this is awesome, because, you usually hear about it the other way from an amputee who's lost the arm, still thinks it's there. So it's ghost limb. And you've actually reverse engineered that. So in his brain, as his brain develops, he'll have this and he'll develop the movement. So when And I agree with you, man. Like, this is only a matter of time, and hopefully it's your company, Ambionics, that you started out of this, that develops this. Somebody's going to develop a solution, because it always does come, and it's a case of leaving your options open. I love what you've done, man. I didn't know you did that with the penny solution at the start, putting together that. So out of that, you developed Ambionics, which is what you're doing now, and what your sole focus is now.
Yes. Yeah. So that came around about this time last year. Sol had his first NHS arm, which is like I think it's fiberglass varnished, and on the socket with a silicon hand. That's, I think, comes to about 350 quid in total. And most kids don't tend to wear them; they just sort of sit in the corner of the room. But Sol was wearing it; he was grabbing and reaching things. And I wanted to try and keep whatever I came up with as similar to that as possible. And I knew that the NHS wouldn't offer myoelectrics until he was 3, possibly even 4, depending on how good a signal they could get from the muscle under the skin. So I thought that's far too long. I knew with my psychology hat on that there are 2 periods of brain pruning where the brain literally prunes away nerves that are not used very often to make itself more efficient. So it's literally destroying itself. And you start off with twice the number of neurons that you'll need as an adult in childhood. So the first 2.5 years is about plucking away literally half of your nerves in the brain. And much of learning to sit up, stand up, first words, these are as much about trimming away useless nerves as they are about reinforcing or adding extra myelination to the nerves which are used. So I thought intervening at 3 years of age, when that period of pruning finishes at about 2.5, just didn't make sense to me. I thought I needed to make sure that Sol had mastered the use of a grasp by the time he's 2.5 years old, and we're on track to do that now.
That's brilliant, man, because you're actually tying together so many elements we've talked about on the show over time. Like, we did a show on habits, and the brain stores habits. The reason being to actually save energy, because all it wants to do is keep you alive. And you're saying the same thing here, because we Professor Susan Greenfield on a few weeks ago. She's an eminent brain professor from the UK, and she's saying the same thing. Like, you like, for example, by putting kids on tablets too long, their brains develop differently. They don't develop emotional skills, etc. So you're tapping into all this stuff, man. And so this is stuff you did not know about 2 years ago.
Well, I knew about the psychology. I've always had a keen interest in developmental psychology. I think the changes that go on through the womb and for the first 5 years are the most interesting area of any kind of development in psychology. But also the neuroscience stuff. I was never interested in the Freudian wishy-washy kind of sort of made up stuff. I was always into the hard science side stuff. And we know that there's 2 real prominent periods of this brain pruning, and a lot is known about the second one, which is around puberty. So, memories, thoughts, skills, things that you haven't really mastered by the time you hit puberty, you never will. That's well understood. In a few rare case studies where children have not learned any language, they never will if they hit puberty having not learned language. But that goes for reasoning skills, gymnastics, sports, music, anything. The problem is that I approached the university to try and study this really poorly understood but rapidly explosive period of brain growth, and academics won't touch it. There's just not enough known about that area already for them to get a hook into. So it's really risky. Even though, to you and me, just at face validity, it makes perfect sense. This period of brain pruning is going on. Why not try and implement something sooner? Just, what if? Yeah. But academically, they won't touch it because very little is understood. Unfortunately, you can't keep, a 12-month-old baby still in an MRI machine. They don't do too well in interviews, so not much has been studied about it. But that was my rationale, that the same thing with puberty. If you don't learn a skill by the time you finish that pruning at the end of puberty, then you never will. I figured that maybe that's why kids around about the age of 2.5 to 3 just disregard prosthetics if function is left till too late. And I found a clear pattern. So I started looking around, American sites, European sites looking at prosthetics and orthotics. And this cornerstone idea was the earlier you can get intervention, the better, and especially with function. So I looked at what was available. Okay, myoelectrics is the dominant approach, but they're not particularly useful, given the puppy fat that babies have. And body-powered hooks, which Sol's about to be fitted for, are quite hideous-looking things. They really look like they came out of a Doctor Who episode. And they're not what you'd associate with a cute child. They're quite industrial-looking, but very functional. I thought there's got to be a combination. So I've come up with something that uses fluid, and it's only It's not for all amputees. It's only for certain levels of amputation or for limb deficiency. But where there is the ability to provide body power, then you can use that to displace fluid and control a basic grip. And that's never been done before. So that's really what Ambionics is here to develop and try and get out to children as far and wide as possible.
Yeah, and so just to bring that home for people, so you didn't just focus on soul. You went, okay, well, I'm going to take this pain away from everybody, this challenge. And you decided to just go in it. But I wanted to frame it in this, Ben. You were a tinkerer. You weren't an inventor, but you like to toy around with stuff. And then, so I just think this is marvelous, man. Like, cause I'm talking to you, you're in your man cave right now.
Yeah.
And, but you've turned that man cave into your office. Like some of the best companies in the world have started that way.
I had the idea. You've probably heard it bandied around that I got the idea from a spider. So I was up about 4 a.m. thinking, how could I come up with another system that didn't use electronic sensors, not myoelectric sensors. So I thought maybe like a micro switch in a spongy piece of rubber that you could, to activate a switch with the stump. And I started thinking, who could I talk to about robotics? And then I did see this spider. I remembered that they use fluid, and I thought, that's a brilliant idea. He can certainly squish 2 bags of fluid or actuators inside the socket using the small piece of movable stump that he'd got. So that was it. That was like a eureka moment, and I was a man possessed. I scrounged all the little spare parts that I had from printers and plumbing fittings and stuff from when I'd installed my kitchen, anything that could be used, and started building small double-acting hydraulic cylinders. I don't know if you've seen the videos on my Facebook page and on YouTube. It's basically like an inch-long cylinder with 2 inputs, and you can make a piston slide back and forth with a little O-ring to stop the fluid coming out. I got a reasonably good enough design using just a press drill at home in this man cave. And the hardest thing was getting that dead centered. Once I did, I found a screwdriver handle that was made of chrome. That became the piston rod. A couple of washers inside, they became the piston itself, and some marigold glove fingers, which became the actuators. Got the system working. When I realized that just with my little fingers I could squish those and it actually produced meaningful torque at the other end, a usable grip, I thought, right, this is really simple. Now we just need to put this in something similar to his NHS prosthetic. And took the idea to Bangor University, and they helped me by scanning the arm, producing a 3D mesh of it, which I then imported into Autodesk's Fusion 360 software and started chopping it up. And to be honest with you, it was really, really difficult and really tricky to learn, but it's the way I look at it is it's as I say, it's a kind of therapy for me. When I know I'm making progress, I'm feeling better about that black period of time at the beginning that we were talking about earlier. So I don't know. I'm so busy. I'm working maybe 12 hours a day, maybe longer, but I've never been so happy doing something in my life.
Yeah, man. It's like it's way more than working for yourself. It's working with a mission to make the world a better place. It
better had be, because I haven't been paid for a year, so I've just done it completely for free and begged, borrowed, and stolen money to get my mortgage payments in. So I've been really, really lucky with my parents being able to help me out with at least the mortgage. But Christ, over the last year, I've done patio jobs, gardening, shelf stacking, anything to just keep paying the bills, but allow me to keep on this prototyping. And everyone else thought I was losing it. And quite locally, I think people thought I'd become a bit of a hermit and gone crazy until they saw me all over the TV, and then they realized what it was I was doing.
Yeah, and because let's move to that now, man. Because I've seen you've got so much coverage, but what doesn't add up for me is that you're looking for 40 grand sterling on Indiegogo. Under Ambionics. So if anybody types in Ben Ryan or Ambionics, you'll find you. Yeah. But it's only at 17k. And I'm going to go, what the is happening here?
It's been first of all, the perception is, I think, that we're successful, that we're up and running, we're well funded. We're working with Autodesk, Stratasys are behind us, the NHS have endorsed their approach. We look like a really successful outfit, and when you think that something's successful and lots of other people are looking at it as well, so when it's on TV that millions are looking at it, this thing called bystander behavior kicks in, bystander apathy. Where if bystander apathy is, for example, I think if you're at a busy place and there's lots of other people around and a little old lady falls over, you're a lot less likely to help than if it's only you around.
Oh, wow.
So I think, so it's well-known psychology. So I think people think we're successful, we don't need their help. Someone's going to come and pick this up. There's a lot of people looking at this. It's going to go. But at the moment, I've missed 2 mortgage payments. I'm flying by the skin of my pants. But the reception that we've had to the campaign means that we no longer needed that. Originally, it was 150 grand. That's come down to 40 just from engineers, patent attorneys, parents coming forward as well, offering to take part in clinical trials for free. It's just been amazing. But it's one of these balls that's up in the air. It's got to land soon. We need to, we've got a patent deadline to make sure that we can patent and specify as many countries around the world as we can to produce it. Yeah. We've got to get the prototype and the power-assisted version created by mid-October.
Yeah, man. That was the sound of me just sending an email to somebody I know in the States. I'm going to go, can you help with this? And you know what? I'd ask the audience of the Innovation Show, if you know somebody, I mean, regardless of making your own donation, but if you know somebody who can help, drop us an email, drop Ben an email, you're on Twitter, you're on LinkedIn, you're on Indiegogo, you're reachable, man. I'd love some help to come from the little bit of coverage we can give you with the Innovation Show, because I love your attitude, man. It's something that very few people would deal with positively, and you're a role model for mindset, man. So congratulations for that. And it will happen, man. No doubt this is going to happen for you. And this will all be looking back and go, my AQ is massive as a result of this. Ben, it's been a pleasure talking to you, man. And we wish you the very best of luck. Ben Ryan, CEO and founder of Ambionics. Ben, give us a quick, you'll know off by heart all the places people can find you.
You can find us on Facebook at Ambionics UK, on Instagram at ambionic_boy, on Twitter, and you can look at the website as well, www.ambionics.co.uk.
Nice one, Ben. Well, listen, pleasure to talk to you, man.
Aidan, brilliant. Thank you. Keep in touch.
Take care, man.